welcome. Thanks for taking this time off your Saturday to attend this webinar on understanding and managing ADHD and looking at how we can support ADHD families to thrive. Okay. So we've got a nice mix of ex-students here today. Parents of present students, some school counselors too, and we're gathered here with great interest to better understand ADHD so we can support our girls, ourselves even, and explore how to go beyond just managing, but to even thrive. So I'm Natasha, and I'm glad to be hosting this webinar. I'm one of the vice presidents of the St. Margaret's Ex-Students Association. I'm an alumni of the primary school, and if all goes as planned, I'll be enrolling my daughter in St. Margaret's Primary in 2027. And today on the webinar with me is also Hannah Low. Hannah, she's a fellow board member of mine on the St. Margaret's Ex-Students Association. She's an alumni of the secondary school, and she's also a senior occupational therapist at IMH.
Yeah,
Hannah,
hi
would like to say
everybody.
hi.
Yeah, hi everybody. It's my pleasure and honor to be here. Thanks a lot, Tash, for introducing me.
And of course, our main speaker, Moonlake Lee, founder and director of Unlocking ADHD, who is mom of two St. Margaret's alumni.
Hi, everyone. See you soon.
So here's what happened the rest of this 90 minutes. I'm going to be sharing a few housekeeping points in the next slide before inviting Moonlake up to share. So after which will be a time of Q&A, and then we'll bring things to a close by 3:30 p.m. Okay. So some housekeeping. One, are all of you able to see a Q&A option on your Zoom interface? Because that's where you can enter your questions. So please use that Q&A box and not the chat, because the Q&A box is what we'll be referencing during the Q&A segment. And if you do put it in the chat, we might miss it, okay? So please, again, questions, please post them in the Q&A box. Now, I also want to caveat that this is a big topic and, just like life, we often have more questions than we have answers. But certainly what we're going to do here is to try to answer as many questions as we can. Moonlake's going to be, of course, our subject matter expert. But you also might see Hannah respond to some of them in the chat when she's able to do so. Okay, and the last point is that we are recording this session. I think quite a number of you have asked, and we'll be making it available to all of you here who actually signed up. So not to worry if you might have missed some of the points. You'll definitely get you get to watch the video again. Okay, now, before I invite Moonlake to take over, I thought it'd be nice to just run a quick poll that would help us get to know everyone better around, why we're here and what we're hoping to take away. So you have seen there should be a poll that's just popped up. Can I just invite you to quickly, respond to it, right? So we have some questions like, why did you sign up for the webinar today? And how much do you know about ADHD? A lot, a little, don't know. I think my answer would be don't know. So I'm here to learn more. And I'm very excited to hear from Moonlake. And also, I think from the initial questions that you have already shared with us, we're hoping to also better understand any challenges that you're facing with your child, or if you're a counselor or a teacher here with your students. I think that helps us better set the context and maybe unpack some of these questions. And let's hope to also get some guidance on how to manage and help our girls thrive. Great, thank you. I'm seeing lots of responses come in. Wow, half of us are here because we would like to support a loved one. That's great. There's also quite a keen interest in the topic here. 32% of us have said that we're just really curious about it. And how much do all of us know about ADHD? Most of us say we know a little. Okay, and what are the top 3 challenges we're facing with our child and students? Has around, sorry, I'm also like scrolling just to look at what answers. Okay, inattentiveness, lack of focus, device addiction comes up as well, lack of motivation. Right. So, with that, thank you for responding to the poll. And I think, there's no better time than to just dive into today's topic. So please join me in welcoming Moonlake Lee, founder and director of Unlocking ADHD. She's also a mom to two former St. Margaret's girls. And today she is going to show us how to better understand and support the people in our lives in managing ADHD. So, Moonlake, over to you. Oops.
Thank you very much, Natasha. Great to be here. Really happy because this particular webinar is very meaningful to me because my girls are St. Margaret's girls, SMPS and SMSS. And I'll share the next slides, to show you some photos. So, you can see the memories that I have with St. Margaret's. Hope everyone can see my slide. Yes, so the reason why I'm here today as well, besides being associated with St. Margaret's, is that I'm a late diagnosed ADHD. I was diagnosed when I was 50 years old, not the usual time that you would expect someone to get diagnosed with this kind of a condition. And, for myself, right, I'm having 2 girls. They're 1 year apart and they were at St. Margaret's before when they were kids. My elder daughter actually was diagnosed with ADHD when she was 15 years old and was struggling in school. And I always tell people that St. Margaret's is one of the most safe and friendly schools for someone, who was struggling with the condition because there's just so much avenues for support. Not just in terms of, St. Margaret's Secondary having the express, normal academic and normal technical, but also that chance to embrace diversity. So my 2 daughters were in the St. Margaret's Primary School swimming team. You can see them in their outfits there. If you really zoom in, you can see the SMPS sign. And they were also in the cross-country team. So I was a cross-country mommy and a swimming mommy. I was also involved in the praying parents. For myself, when I look back at my life after being diagnosed with ADHD as, later in life as an adult, I actually have a very varied career. And I always joke that my background, on LinkedIn would be a recruiter's nightmare because I was working in journalism, law, MBA, business, angel investing, even got involved in real estate for En Bloc, and a tech startup. Finally, my latest thing that I'm passionate and focusing on really is with Unlocking ADHD. We're a 4-year-old charity, IPC registered charity and social service agency. And part of the reason why I did this is really because of my journey. So I'm just going to be sharing with you in the next couple of slides. And I hope that it's not just informative, but also gives you some practical strategies that might be help in managing, whether it's your child or yourself as an adult. Okay. So I'm just going to go over the journey that I had. This picture here is of one of my girls, and you can see the St. Margaret's in a report book. She was diagnosed when she was 15, just barely a year before the O levels. And at that stage, when she was in school, the L1R5 was 36 points. So she essentially was failing 5 out of 8 subjects, almost retained. And, if you were to ask her at that time, what are your plans for the future? What would you like to be? She would have told you, I don't know, because she really didn't know what she could do. So that was that situation in that any parent would panic. And that's when, a friend told me about her own daughter being diagnosed with ADHD and had improved after having medication and support. So that's when I sent my daughter for a diagnosis. And she was diagnosed with predominantly inattentive type of ADHD. And after having the medication that helped her focus a little bit, I think a lot of things worked together in her life to bring her to where she is today. That was the end of the year, towards the year-end holidays. And somehow there was a call for whoever wanted to take part in the inter-school biomedical quiz. Now, normally for inter-school academic quizzes, there needs to be some prerequisite that needs to do well, like those Olympiads and all that. But for this one, they didn't have any kind of prerequisite. So she actually jumped on it and she signed up along with a couple of her friends from school. And the topic that year was on ophthalmology. And it was actually self-study. The teachers would just send her like YouTube links for eye surgeries, some scientific articles about the eye. But because she was on the medication, it helped her focus a little bit more. And when she started reading, she found it quite intriguing. So every day there was something interesting to her, and she'd be telling us about some new Russian term or some surgery that she saw. And I've never seen her actually interested in learning. And so a few months later, when the school term started, Sec 4, despite the 10-year series papers, I actually forgot about the quiz, but she went for it. She came back one day and said, Mom, I won a silver medal. And suddenly she realized she wasn't so stupid after all. And that was a watershed moment for her. And then the following month, she entered the inter-school math team quiz and they came in runner-up. And so the sense of, being able to do something and the confidence grew. In fact, later on, she said to me, Mom, I have a confession to make. Do you know why I signed up for the inter-school biomedical quiz and the math quiz? It's because I hated school so much. I wasn't doing well. I was looking for any excuse to get out of school. And it was a legit way to skip school. And I think that's pretty believable, right? For those of you who are parents with kids that age. So I think that many things can be used and turned around, God's grace, right? So Alyssa that year won a model learner certificate from her class. And at the parent-teacher meeting that year was the first time in 10 years that I had something positive from the teachers. Her teacher told me and told her, Alyssa, we expect great things from you. And I just want to encourage and affirm the power of positive expectation for our kids, whether it's from us as parents or teachers to the students. Because when we have that positive expectation, then there's an encouragement to do more. Alyssa began to try to even get 6 points. In the end, she didn't get 6, but because she worked hard, she studied with her friends, she gave her phone to me voluntarily. She ended up getting 14 points. Less than 3 years later, she managed to get into university in the UK to dental school, which is actually quite a miracle. So the picture that you see in the middle is of Alyssa and myself being featured in the Straits Times live section. That was the month that I launched Unlocking ADHD in October 2021. Alyssa, and you'll hear from me later on as we go on, there were certain adjustments and challenges for her. So, she is back in Singapore, realizing that the weather there didn't suit her, but she's still determined to continue her journey. So she's actually taking her exams again, A-levels, to try to get back to dentistry, either in Singapore or Hong Kong. So we don't know which way the journey will go, but I'm very, very proud of her resilience, her determination, and the fact that she's really taking ownership of her wiring. Some really other quick pictures there before I go on to the meat of the presentation. I was very blessed to be able to be nominated and be a finalist for Singaporean of the Year back in 2022. And the reason why I was so happy about that was because it finally brought ADHD into the mainstream. To hear President Halima talk about ADHD in her speech was very meaningful to us. And the month after we launched Unlocking ADHD, we managed to get Channel News Asia to cover a story on women with ADHD. So if you go to YouTube and you Google women with ADHD CNA, you will see that video of 3 women, myself included, who show a different face of what ADHD can look like in women who may not always be thought of having the typical symptoms. We had a vet, a former PhD scholar, and myself. Okay, so let's go to the meat of the presentation now, and I'll try to make it interesting and short, and then we can deal with the questions later too. Mainly, there are 3 kinds of presentations: hyperactive, impulsive, inattentive, and a combination. Okay, and for the hyperactive, people always think of it as little boys, bouncing off walls. For myself, if you can't tell by now, I'm predominantly hyperactive impulsive. So yes, I'm always on the go. I find that I don't have breaks. So that's a bit of a struggle. And that's where the medication helps me, and also the mindfulness. But the more common type of presentation for ADHD actually is in the inattentive type for girls and women. And that's why they tend to be identified much later on. When all the coping techniques or the masking falls away, whether it's due to circumstances like, say, COVID, or hormonal changes. But for girls particularly, many of them with inattentive ADHD get easily overwhelmed. They seem to be lost in another world. There's a lot of issues about lack of attention to detail. I remember like in the past, for exams, my kid could actually miss the whole second page of questions and not answer them during exams. So it will be like a fail or almost fail. There's also issues with anything that requires more mental effort. Then there's a tendency to not want to do that, to avoid. And also very forgetful, losing a lot of things. So the combination factors are the most common type of presentation for ADHD, a little bit of both. And in the blue column here, you can see how ADHD clinically is different from the so-called occasional lapses of whether it's attention or hyperactivity, right? The symptoms need to be present at least 6 months or longer, usually longer. And the key that the clinicians look at, and I'm sure Hannah later can also share a little bit more about this, is that the behavior is inappropriate for that particular age group. And the impairment or the struggles need to be present in at least 2 settings. And it needs to be evident, especially for adults before age 12, which is why they always ask for a copy of your school report book or for a family member to go in with you. And it's not better explained by any other condition. So for children, out of these 2 boxes here, 6 out of 9 is the one that look at, and for adults, it's 5 out of 9. Okay, I want to talk about the ADHD iceberg, because what people normally see is the surface part, the issues with focusing or the fidgeting. But there's a whole lot of stuff going on underneath the iceberg. And if you look at some of these things, I'm not going to go through every single one, but just a quick glance, you can see that some of this might be familiar to you, whether it's to do with, sleeping issues, it's an all or nothing kind of mentality, a very poor sense of time, getting so focused on something that they forget to eat, go to the bathroom, sleep. Again, we talked about losing items and also getting a bit sensitive to perceived criticism. So some of these are the common kind of, presentations. And why is it so important that we know about ADHD today? It's because of the impact. We looked at the global data, and the impact of the prevalence for children is 5 to 8%, and for adults is 2 to 7%. So that is not a small number. And it's not just the person that is affected by ADHD, but it's the people around them. I think for any of you who have a family member with ADHD, you know that it can really impact on the life quite significantly. The other key factor to know is that there's a genetic link for ADHD. Many of the parents in our community who were diagnosed as adults were diagnosed after the children. I was diagnosed a year after my daughter was diagnosed because, like any parent, I was trying to read up more about the condition, and then I realized that there was a genetic link. Then the next question was, at this age, really, should I go for a diagnosis? Is it really relevant and applicable to me? But in the end, because I was so hyperactive, I kept on taking on more things than I could chew. I was getting to a state of overwhelm and stress. So that's when I decided to reach out for help. And I'm glad I did, because it really changed my life. So it's never too late. We also know, and the month that I launched, I got together with another charity called Spark, which also supports parents with children with ADHD. And we did the first ground up survey of the community to see how they're impacted by ADHD. And we took the findings of this ground up survey to present to the different government ministries so that they have a better idea of the needs on the ground. And in 1 month, almost 600 people responded, about half parents and half were adults with ADHD. And the data is here that we had from our ground up survey. 79% of the people reported that the family relationships in the homes were very much negatively affected, whether it's with parent-child power struggles, marital conflicts because of different parenting approaches, or just because of the emotional dysregulation of one or both of the partners. In school, almost 70% of the children had trouble progressing. And I've just shared with you, my daughter's story as well, right? So I'm still living that. And then at work, almost 40% of those who are adults have trouble staying in a job. So if you look at my LinkedIn, again, it's very varied. I still did move from job to job in terms of I finished one thing, then I went on to another. But for many people, sometimes they move because they weren't able to cope, or they actually got fired because of other issues that were a challenge. So what can we do as a society about that? What can we do as parents, teachers, loved ones of those with ADHD? We also found that there is something called comorbidity or co-occurring coexisting conditions. ADHD rarely travels alone. In our survey, about 88% of the adults, 72% of the children had another condition on top of ADHD, and the most common on the mental health side was anxiety and depression. And on the learning side, the special education needs, I would call the Holy Trinity: ADHD, ASD, autism spectrum disorder, and dyslexia. Many people have more than one. And that's something that makes ADHD such a complex thing to manage and also to diagnose. I think among the questions that we received prior to the webinar was, what is the difference in ADHD between girls and boys? As I mentioned earlier, boys tend to be the more external kind of presentations, but for girls, it is more internal. And therefore, that's why we can miss it. It could be very withdrawn, it could be low self-esteem, anxiety, inattentive, poor academic achievement, daydreaming, right? And the other thing about girls is that because we internalize a lot of things, that's where it sort of festers and grows. And there are literature that says that for girls, besides the mental health issues, there's also issues with self-image, eating disorders, self-harm, and all that. So I think we really need to take extra special care of our girls during this very critical period of the tweens and teens. I just want to also address some misconceptions about ADHD and the ADHD wiring. I think one of the best ways to think about ADHD is really from a strength-based perspective. Think of it as a Ferrari engine, the brain, with bicycle brakes. Okay, this was not coined by me, but by Dr. Edward Hallowell, a very renowned psychiatrist in the US who has ADHD. So because it's a Ferrari brain, that means that there's a lot of strengths and talent there. But because the brakes are bicycle brakes, the self-regulation part is not strong enough. And that's why if you think about the Formula One circuit and the sharp turns, if the brakes are not strong enough, the car will go off track and crash. So what can we do, let's say for ourselves as a charity or the professionals in our midst here today, what can we do to help strengthen the brakes of those with the ADHD wiring so that they can complete the race and even win the race? So we look at it from a strength-based perspective. It's an upskilling thing and a support thing. The ADHD brain wiring is not a priority-based wiring. We're really wired for interest-based. So things that are interesting catch our attention and we can burrow into it. And actually, in that sense, we become so hyper-focused, we can develop actually a mini expertise or mini mastery in that. That can become a strength. And that's where we can maybe try to bring that up, because that's how people thrive when they're in the zone, working according to the strength. We're also not just interest-based, but also novelty-based. New stuff interests us, and also urgency-based. That's why all the procrastination until the last minute, and then we get things done. Not the best way to operate, but we need to understand that wiring and work with it. The other thing is that not everyone that has ADHD is always failing out in school. There's a certain segment of the ADHD population that's what's called twice exceptionals that may be on the higher end of the bell curve when it comes to IQ or talents in sports or artistry and so on. And sometimes they get overlooked because maybe that particular talent outweighs the challenges. Or in some cases, like in my daughter's case, it was actually almost like, back to ground zero or even underperforming. So we really need to be able to look closely at some of these kids who may not be getting the help that they need. I know that many of the schools that are the independent schools are coming to me now too, because the kids that were always so bright and doing well in school are actually having a lot of challenges now when there's less scaffolding and support around them. We need to understand that people don't grow out of ADHD. Again, I got diagnosed when I was 50. My uncle got diagnosed in his 80s. There is a gender difference I mentioned earlier. And ADHD really is also a physiological issue where we're actually having a lower amount of chemical in the brain called dopamine that makes us feel good. And that's why many of us tend to seek excitement or seek things that make us feel good, because that's how we're trying to make up for that lower dopamine level. And that's something we need to realize so that we can also adjust that. And ADHD medication does help to adjust that imbalance. We also know that ADHD is a spectrum. So it's not just one size fits all. If you've seen one ADHD, I've only seen one ADHDer. Okay, there's no certain look. I've been told many times that I don't look ADHD. I'm not sure what that means. Okay, so let's not box people in like that. And some people say ADHD may not be the most appropriate name because the word actually means attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But actually, we don't have a deficit of attention. We have an abundance of attention, too much sometimes. My radar's all over the place. So actually, it's a misnomer. we actually have an attention regulation issue, right? I skipped a slide earlier, but for the ADHD in girls part, again, we need to be really taking care of our girls and protecting them, because we need to also know that for girls and for females, because of the hormonal cycle, at different parts of that cycle, the symptoms can get more pronounced or may need a higher dosage of medication. For example, let's say menstruation. Sometimes some of the women that I know have found that they might need maybe a higher dose during that period of the month. And we know that women with ADHD are more prone to postpartum depression, and the symptoms get worse around the perimenopause, menopausal stage as well. So that's something that's going to be different from men. There's actually an attempt now globally to look at how ADHD looks like in women and whether we should come up with a different kind of test or criteria to assess and diagnose women, because we've been using a diagnosis framework that is actually geared towards children and males. So I'm part of the global focus group on that, and stay tuned. We'll let you know the next few years what's happening. We also know that girls mask a lot because of society or culture, and that's why sometimes they're harder to identify and support. I'm just sharing you really quickly here for those who are teachers. Some things that those with ADHD wish that teachers knew is, number one, any student can have it. Again, we said it's across the spectrum, girls and boys that do well, as well as those who don't do so well. And we really try our best. I think that we try a lot harder just to keep up, because we're going against the grain so many times. So I think it's important to also recognize and affirm the efforts and not just the results. And also many of us have very low esteem just because we've been hearing so many negative feedback from around us. And we do need help and understanding and not punishment. Okay. In terms of how can teachers communicate with parents, that's another hurdle for them, because sometimes parents, when they first hear about that word, they react with denial, anger, shock, but some have apathy about it or find it funny. I think we don't use labels. Let's focus on the symptoms, very factual things, so that that's easier to understand without having any misconceptions. And the key thing is, really to ensure that everyone has the student or the child's best interest at heart, and see how that we can all work together to support the child. Okay, and for teachers, it's really to also make notes of some of the behavior or some of the issues, so that it's something very objective to share with the parents. How counselors can help is emotional support, maybe support groups of girls, maybe going through a similar kind of struggle, so that they have that kind of peer support too, besides the counselor support. Mindfulness journaling helps. Looking for where the strengths are. There are many different tests available to identify strengths and interest areas, and that sometimes can give the person the self-confidence they need when they're not doing so well in other areas. And also really advocating, whether it's to other classmates, to the teachers, and parents and other people that are working with the student or the child. Some people have asked, like, should I go for an ADHD diagnosis? What's the benefit of this? And I think for myself and my daughter, one of the biggest thing was really clarity. And my daughter told me a couple of years ago, because I actually suspected that she had ADHD when she was 10, but I didn't do anything about it beyond some preliminary questioning of around the providers, because my husband and I discussed it and we said we didn't want to label her so early. And she said, Mom, I wish you had done something earlier, because it would have saved her a lot of scolding and shaming and tears and, just not doing well and further eroding her self-esteem. So I would encourage people who are struggling, don't wait. And also for people like myself or older, having the clarity means that you know what exactly is going on. You can go and search, whether it's Google or something, for people with a similar condition. You can look for resources online, and also, ways to cope better just by broadening up that community. Without having a proper name for it, for what you're going through, it makes it so much harder because you don't know what you're dealing with. Also for ADHD diagnosis, a formal diagnosis enables a person to access medication, which in many cases is first line. About 70–80% of people actually do better with medication. So that's something that needs to be considered. And we always say it's not just meds alone. You have to combine it with therapy, coaching, lifestyle changes, but meds can go a long way. I always think about it as wearing a pair of glasses. If you're short-sighted and you can't see well, you need to get your contact lenses or your glasses. Otherwise, it would affect the efficiency of your learning. So that's how ADHD medication functions too. Okay, and we also know that earlier intervention reduces the risk of mental health issues cropping up later on. So that's a really important reason as well to get help early. And we want to own the label rather than have others label us. In fact, now in some situations, ADHD is sort of cool. I mean, in the sense that you found someone with a similar wavelength as you, and I'm very happy to meet fellow ADHDers. And for my husband, whenever I say to him, oh, people ask me why should they get diagnosed when we're adults or older adults, he said, for goodness sake, even if you think you're doing okay, think about the people around you, think about the impact on your family. I'm always not very happy to hear that, but I get what he says, right? So also think about those around you and how your behavior might be impacting them. Where to get diagnosed. There's a QR code at the bottom of the graphic there. That's where you can watch a video that we have on our YouTube on diagnosis and management of ADHD in children and teens. We had 4 professionals across different specialty areas answer the questions. We also have one on adults with ADHD. For those in school, please reach out to the SEN officer, counselor, form teacher. There's also REACH. And then, the other options are all there from psychologists, psychiatrists, and so on. You can also go to our website for resources or write in. What does it cost? And, where do you go? Basically, public, private. Public is definitely more accessible, more affordable, but there is a waiting list. So that's one of the things that you have to deal with. For the private side, much faster, but of course the fees are much higher. And why is there such a huge range between 300 to 3,000? It depends whether you're seeing a psychiatrist or a psychologist that does a lot of assessments and testing. For those who can afford it and whose kids are still in school, I would still recommend seeing both a psychiatrist and a psychologist, because when the psychologist does the assessment, you have a better idea of your child's learning gaps and what kind of support they need. And many schools actually require a psychologist letter to provide accommodations for exams. What I personally do is I actually do what I call a hybrid. I'm actually seeing a psychiatrist in a restructured hospital as a private patient. So I pay more than, let's say, a subsidized patient, but I can still select the provider that I would like to see, and it's a little bit lower in fees than a private clinic. Okay, so ADHD medication, I'm not going to go into big detail on this. Maybe we can answer this in the Q&A side. But just to say that ADHD medication is not addictive, okay? In fact, many ADHDers forget to take their medication. And again, treat it as one of a whole toolkit to approach the issue. It should not be the only thing that you do. I have a slide here, and I would encourage you guys to scan it. On the left hand of the slide, there's a QR code. This is the ESQR. It actually is a questionnaire to measure executive function skills. If I recall correctly, in that quick poll that we did in the beginning of the webinar, many of you identified that one of your biggest challenges was executive function for your children. What is that? It's really the brain's GPS, and that helps someone get things done. And at this stage, the brain part is not really mature yet. So this test, a quick test, at least you can do it on behalf of your child, or you can get your child to do it if they're old enough, gives you an idea of which are the areas that may be a bit more of a struggle, and just focus on one area at a time. So again, if they do it and the score is 2 or higher or closest to 2, those are the areas to focus on first. The QR code on the right is the Restart Starter Kit that is done by Unlocking ADHD. It's more for youth and adults. The top QR code is actually a self-assessment that was created by the WHO Committee on Adult ADHD. So for those of you who are not really sure yet whether you have ADHD, then try and do that. And the bottom one is just to download the starter kit. It's free of charge to download on our website. Okay, I'm going to go through really quick on executive functioning because I want to leave more time for questions. Okay, so bear with me a little bit. Okay, again, I mentioned executive functioning as sort of the GPS for the brain. It really lies in the front part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, the last part to develop in humans. Some research says actually mid-20s or late 20s, and that's for people who are neurotypical. So the bad news is for those who are, neurodivergent, particularly like say ADHD, is actually about 30% behind in terms of development. Again, it's nothing to do with IQ, it's just a maturation thing. So what does 30% developmental delay look like? Think of it in human years, about 3 to 8 years behind, depending on severity of the condition and the supports. So if a child, let's say, is 12 years old, PSLE year, and if you think about the slower maturation of the prefrontal cortex, the executive function, that means the executive function age could be at best 9 years old. So when I first heard about this, and that's only a few years ago, I actually have a huge wave of guilt because I was thinking I was expecting my kid to be on the same level in terms of the executive function as other kids that may not have the same condition. And that's actually setting up someone up for failure because of our expectation. So we need to understand what we're working with and adjust our expectations and meet people where they are, not where we wish that they could be. Because once we get over that and understand that, it's actually a lot more straightforward in terms of support. Is when we have those maybe unrealistic expectations, that's where some of the stress and trouble lies. We do know from research, almost 80% or higher of people with ADHD struggle with executive function. And it's not just them, it's also other youths because of the brain development. So Dr. Russell Barkley, who's one of the gurus of ADHD, said actually ADHD should be renamed as executive function disorder. And he said, it's not a matter of knowing what to do, but it's doing what you know, right? If you think about it, it's really the execution part. But the good news is it can be coached or trained. And again, this diagram here shows you some of the main types of executive function issues, okay? I want to give you some practical strategies now so that at least everyone that is attending today has something to take away that they could use or put in practice. So for those whose kids are struggling with organization, these are some quick tips. And that's worked for me, for my daughter as well, and the people I know. Many of us need visual reminders and schedules to keep us on track. And so, I'm a stickler for the weekly planner. And I plan and I schedule something because if it's not in my schedule, it doesn't exist. Okay, and what I do is something called the Sunday night overhaul. So on Sunday nights, I look at my schedule for the upcoming 1 or 2 weeks and see what needs to be adjusted, whether it's any meetings canceled, rescheduled, moved back, any looming deadlines, so that I can plan. And once I've had that plan, then I can rest in peace. Because if we don't take stock from time to time like that on a regular basis, that's where it gets very chaotic. We also know that we have issues with overwhelm. And one way to deal with it is actually to break things down into smaller pieces so it's more manageable. Okay, we just need to keep being consistent. Even if we didn't exactly fulfill what we wanted for that day, keep going because it will be better. For those who have difficulty with planning, again, I think one really important thing is actually visualization. They talk about the mind's eye, because many times when we're planning something, we are not at that point of execution. So the only way to plan well is to visualize ourselves at that point in time. What do we need? What are we missing? What are the things that can go wrong? And that's where we can start working backwards. So that's a pretty important key of planning, is actually the visual part. Okay. And we need to also put in certain timelines to check in to see whether we're on track. The other issue about ADHD is actually the emotional dysregulation. It's something that not many people talk about, but it's present. And I think for us as parents, one of the things to remember actually is the importance of co-regulation, because certain emotions are actually quite, I would say, contagious. Like say anxiety. If you're anxious, it actually transfers over to the child too. So for myself, and I worry, I tend to catastrophize, worry about the future, and somehow we think it's going to be worse than it is. It actually affects our children as well. So my daughter, who's now 22, has enough confidence and maturity now to tell me, Mom, you're making me anxious. And then I'll take a step back. And I think it's important for us to realize the part that we also play in having a more calm household. So that's something to think about. Emotional awareness, having the vocabulary to identify and name whatever emotion we're feeling, not just the usual ones. And also having that safe space, where people can retreat at home or at school. Let me go on to the next slide. The emotions really play a major part in how we behave, and I don't think we address it often enough. And it's important to realize that we need to feel safe, to feel a sense of belonging and security, to learn successfully. And I think what someone shared before that really got me was that shamed brains can't learn, scared brains can't learn, pained brains can't learn. And so let's see how we can create an environment where the brains of the children that we have can feel safe. So then they can focus on really accessing the learning and absorbing it. Okay, so for behavior regulation, again, having the role playing, setting clear rules, and it's okay to have immediate rewards because sometimes that's the dopamine that the ADHD brain needs. So don't overthink it. And really also try to get into the habit of pausing, because pausing really helps to have that short circuit for a little bit between the emotion and the behavior, and that sometimes cuts out a lot more impulsivity, things that we might regret later on. And I found that for myself, I try and sleep over things so that I don't jump into it right away and overcommit. So the stop thinking and acting is actually a good sort of traffic light system to remember. I'm pretty much almost done now. And I just want to share a little bit about Unlocking ADHD before we go into the Q&A, in case any of you are not familiar with it. For Unlocking ADHD, what we're really trying to do in Singapore is that we know that the symptoms of ADHD impair relationships and cause underperformance in school, work, and life, leading to lost potential. So we're really trying to claim back that lost potential for everyone, because we really want to bring hope to the families who are struggling, who can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. We want to bridge the gaps in information, support, resources, and finances. And we also want to boost social mobility. So we're looking at our 4 pillars of awareness, accessibility, achievement, advocacy to get there, so that we can empower ADHDers and their families to live life to the fullest. So do check out our website. It was done by volunteers. We have stories and about ADHDers, their journeys, what worked for them. We have microsites in Malay, Mandarin, and Tamil. We also have information about for families, for adults, on relationships. Check out our YouTube. We have about 40 plus videos on our YouTube, including parenting, relationships, how to thrive, exam hacks, financial management, career strategies, and also one each in the official languages. So we hope that will be a good resource for you. And then we do work with schools and students. I've done workshops with school counselors. I've gone to the law school to talk about executive functioning. So happy to see how we can work with the St. Margaret schools. For this slide, and there are some QR codes here as well. Again, do check the Unlocking ADHD website and all the links there for resources. I mentioned Spark Singapore earlier, the other charity that supports parents. They do have events. They tend to focus more on parents and also younger kids. If you scan the QR code at the bottom, you have a link to their resources, and they have a very useful booklet as well. So do check it out. There's Parent-Child Journey. Dr. Dan Shapiro, who's a developmental behavioral pediatrician. Very useful stuff. Many of them are free or very accessible. So I highly recommend it for his courses and resources on medication, on parenting, on dealing with anxiety, and so on. Attitude Magazine is like the Bible for those who have ADHD, so please check it out. Seth Perler has a lot of good free resources. He's a former special needs teacher for executive function, and some really good books there by Hallowell and Barkley and Shapiro. Another good resource here, and you can scan the QR code, was compiled together by Vargini. Vargini Lachmi Kantan is a special education needs integrator at an international school with over 20 years experience in the UK, working with primary and secondary school children. So we worked together on a previous event, and she came up with this Padlet with some resources for you. So do check it out. And then finally, Unlocking ADHD is a charity. There's an IPC. We just got it last month. So that means that any donations that you make to Unlocking ADHD, you will be able to minus 2.5%, 2.5 times the amount donated from your taxes. And we're also part of the Tote Board 1-for-1 matching campaign. So any donations will be double in the impact. So if you found the sharings today helpful to you, or if you'd like to support Unlocking ADHD further, we'd be really grateful if you want to scan this QR code here to make a donation. And my team can also put the link in the chat so that's easier for you to access. And I will pass the time back to Tash right now, and I'll stop sharing.
Thanks, Moonlake. Thanks, Moonlake, for sharing your story and also giving us a lot more knowledge on this topic. And if I can get someone to help just spotlight me, thank you. And so it's now time for the Q&A, and I'm also going to invite Hannah to come join us, turn on her camera, and help respond to some of the questions. So it's Q&A. Thank you for some of you who have posed questions in the Q&A box, and we can also take them verbally. I think you just need to indicate, put your hand up. And I've got a little audience here, as you can see. This is the girl that will be in St. Margaret's Primary. But anyway, back to this. So I want to first start the ball rolling as you input your questions.
Should we get Hannah as well?
Yes, Hannah's here. Oh yes,
Yes,
if
I'm
someone
here.
could help spotlight Hannah and also Moonlake. So I think you can see all three of us. In fact, actually,
Great.
both of them are the ones who'll be answering the questions mostly. Right. So, Hannah, my first question to you is, could you please tell us more about what an occupational therapist does? I think a lot of us hear OT, but we don't really know what you do. So could you help us with that?
Yeah, sure. Okay, thanks, Dash. Yes, the occupational therapist role is quite new. I think it's an up and coming profession. But I'm just gonna share a little bit about what we do in the Singapore context. So basically, we have an association that actually defines the health profession as one that empowers and enables people of all ages who face difficulties in their everyday activities. So we call them occupations. So occupations to us are like self-care, play, leisure, school, and work. And most of the time when you meet an occupational therapist, they will consider your holistic needs from a physical, social, emotional, mental, cognitive process, and then they will actually kind of like support your recovery and see how you can achieve goals in life to support recovery and improve the quality of life. So I think in the context of ADHD, oftentimes we see them in a younger age. So we see them as a child or we see them in adolescence phase. And a lot of times our role is to look at their participation, their well-being. And as Monique has shared, there's a lot of difficulties that children with ADHD face, both in school and at home and the community. Also some of the questions that you all have. So as an occupational therapist, we actually look at how the ADHD symptoms affect the daily lives, whether it's at home, in school, or whatever parents say, whatever school reports through parents. And then we look at how we can, look at occupations, which is like your daily activities to empower you the skills, things like some executive functionings like organization of time, looking at also like, how you plan your time. Sometimes when there's motor skills problems or even social skills issues, we will also look into that. So it's quite a lot of things, but in summary, I think this is the best I can try to explain what an occupational therapist would do.
Thank you, Hannah. All right. So thanks. Where I'm seeing like about 6 questions in there. So maybe let me just read out the first question, right? So someone is asking actually about the medication and side effects. Is there any lifelong side effects for my child to start taking this medication so early? And does it mean that she has to take it for the rest of her life? And any side effects for that too? Moonlake?
Okay, I'll jump first and then Hannah, feel free, right, to add. I think it's a good question. It's a question that actually a lot of parents are concerned about. First of all, lifelong medication. I think that's the impression that everyone thinks. And actually the answer is no, it doesn't need to be lifelong. First of all, I want to introduce the concept of something called a medication trial. Okay, so usually when medication is first prescribed by the psychiatrist or the pediatrician for a child, let's say, there's usually a period, it could be a month or 2 months or a couple of weeks, where the parents actually urge to, when the child is taking it, to monitor the effects. Okay, and one really good resource, and Unlocking ADHD has got a 2-part webinar on understanding and managing ADHD medications on our YouTube channel. So please check it out. One really good resource is Dr. Dan Shapiro's website, parentchildjourney.com. Under the resources section, there is actually a free downloadable PDF on medication trial for stimulant medication and also one for non-stimulants. So that actually allows people to track on a rating scale how effective is the medication at addressing addressing the symptoms, like say the distractibility, right, or the lack of focus. And also there's another section on side effects to track again how bad or how mild are the side effects. Then when you have that review with the doctor, you can use that as a basis to have a very factual kind of scientific conversation on what's working, what's not working. Because one of the things that we often don't understand about ADHD medication, myself included, until I did more research, is that ADHD medication doesn't act like a Panadol or an antibiotic, that when you take it right away, it whacks whatever it is that's troubling you. It actually is something called calibration and titration. That means in human, or rather layperson language, is trial and error. And nobody likes to hear that because, we know how long it takes, right? But that means you need patience and you have to adjust expectations. So it might be that, when you test it, by being able to measure on a rating scale the effectiveness of it or the side effects, you know where to find the optimum. With the minimal side effects and the maximum effectiveness. And it could be that you might have to adjust dosage, type of medication, or time of day that you take it. So there's a lot of different strategies. So please don't give up early. But the key thing is medication trials. You're not committing for life. That's number one, right? If you try it and you've tweaked it and it doesn't seem to work, that's fine. There's other ways. And we don't want to be overly dependent. So I hope that answered the question. Hannah, anything else you want to add?
Right. Yeah, actually, Moonlake, I think your sharing is definitely very personal. In fact, I'm learning new things from you about medication. I think, okay, when it comes to medication, right? And I'm also looking at the first question, which is like, this person is asking about a 6-year-old kind of like concern about medication. Usually for a young age, professionally, we wouldn't recommend it so quickly. We actually kind of like use more of the other kind of strategies, which are like behavior strategies, teaching you executive functioning, how do you structure your time, planning your time. Behavior strategies would be like, for example, there'll be certain behaviors that may not be very desirable. So, as parents, how do you use parenting to kind of like give consequences or you praise good behavior? So professionally, in my experience, parents tend to be a bit more concerned about medication for a child in a young age. And actually, even the guidelines, right, they don't start at 6, they start later on, around 7 and above. Yeah, for medication as a first line of treatment. Yeah, so I would say, from my understanding as a professional, when I meet with parents and with their concerns, and I'm a parent myself as well, right? I think if I could, usually I would do something, I would try out those that are non-medication kind of strategies first. And if for some reason it's really still not working, and usually most parents are quite concerned when a child is getting towards primary 6, because in Singapore context, there's PSLE coming, there's academic demands, and there's a lot of things for a child to struggle or even to take. That's when they might consider the medication route. So I think at the end of it, it's really up to the parents' comfort. And I agree with Moonlake, it's a journey of like titrating for what's the best dose. And actually I'm learning. I mean, like, to me, what I knew about medication also, it's like a stimulant kind of thing. So actually the effects of different medication last differently as well. So like there's
Absolutely,
a question
yes.
on Medicanet, sorry, and also Ritalin. They're all very different. So really it's about titrating and finding the right one if you do take on the medication route lah. Yeah.
Yeah, I love analogy. So maybe I'll just jump in on that one, right? So the same medication works differently in different people. Okay, so like for myself, the medication works like a brake on me. Okay, so my husband used to say he knew when I was taking my meds because I speak slower like a normal person. Okay, but it can also act like a spark plug for those who are a little bit more inattentive and really have a tough time getting going in the morning. So I've friends, for example, that put the alarm clock next to them with a glass of water and the meds. When the clock rings, they pop in the meds and they go back to sleep for another half an hour or something, until the medication kicks in, and then they can get out of bed. Whereas I jump out of bed in the morning because I got too many things to do, right? So we're all wired differently, and the medication works differently in each of us. So again, going back to analogies, think of it like a pair of glasses. Again, if you can't see very well, there are different hacks you can take to see better. Sit closer to the front, right? Near the whiteboard. You could, like some of us with Lao Hua, right? we don't want to wear glasses, we take a picture of the menu, then we make it very big on our phone, right? So that we can see the words better.
That's
And,
me.
and these are all hacks that sort of work, but we're not really addressing the underlying, right? And think about it. If we're spending so much of our energy and time trying to make out the words, we could have been just absorbing if we could just see without even thinking more about it, like when wearing our glasses.
Right.
So that's one important way to think about medication. And because again, and I mentioned that most people forget to take it regularly, so the addictiveness of it is not in that way. It comes out of your system, which is why like Ritalin, right? The short acting one, you have to take it twice a day, right? It's to top it up.
Yeah,
So just like glasses, at the end of the day, when you take it off and you go to sleep, you're back to square one. So that's why it's important to have other strategies on top of the medication, like the therapy part or the coaching part, to learn habits and change your lifestyle. So they all work together.
Yeah, so related to medication, because there is a related question, right? So someone did share that one of her daughter took a dose of Medicanet and developed tics, and she stopped it as a result. And if I hear what you guys were saying, that a lot of this is kind of like trial and error. So in this case, yeah, it's actually good that she stopped it. And would y'all advise that maybe it's for her to explore something else that?
Yeah, so maybe I can answer this part. Actually, for medication, yeah, there will be like what Moonlake said. It works differently for different people. There are some common side effects, like usually for methylphenidate, which is Ritalin. There will be kind of like a loss of appetite, and then parents might be a bit concerned about the growth. But there are also sometimes with medication, it actually may kind of like develop tics. Yeah. So I think as a parent, if you're concerned about any side effects, of course, we know that medication like methylphenidate is short acting, you can just stop it. I think the effects will kind of wear off. But most importantly is that whoever gives you the medication, when there's concern about side effects, is to go back to that professional. So
Yep.
most of the time it's the psychiatrist who will be giving it. And when they first give you medication, they actually wouldn't kind of like give you such a long review. They usually, I mean, I'm speaking from a kind of like a government setting, from a hospital setting. When a psychiatrist gives you a medication, they will usually give you within a month a review. But if you're concerned, you can always give a call or try and make an earlier appointment, that kind of aspect. I think for private, it's even easier because it should be quite accessible in that way. Yeah.
Yeah. One more thing about that topic, sorry, because I know actually we can do a whole webinar on it, which I've done
Yeah.
2 hours, right? Because there's just so
Medication.
much to cover. Is really that as many of us are parents, and we love our kids so much, right? That the thought of putting some so-called foreign substance or pharmaceutical into the body is something that actually worries us, because we worry about all the different things, right? And there's a lot of stuff on the internet that we read, that can also make us feel more alarmed. But sometimes we also have to look at it very rationally, and we take a step back, right? Treat it as just a tool, one of many tools, one that has research, right? But we also know it's not the be all and end all, and take it in that spirit. Because what I've seen as well in working with the community is that many parents withheld medication and saw it as a last resort, and they would try other things first. But we also know from research that medication is one of the most effective. So when we try other things that are not as effective, it actually takes time. So there's an opportunity cost there. So by the time we actually figure, okay, it's not working as well, I need to go back to medication, time has elapsed. And we know that in some situations, right, it's very hard to claw back the time in terms of lost learning to catch up. And then the kid gets further and further held back, and then the confidence goes down. And then sometimes, because of maybe our reluctance to try medication, the kid picks up on that. And then when it's time to actually try it, they actually don't want to. So there's other things that sometimes we don't think so far ahead, right? Until we actually experience it. And that's what I've seen. So at least one of the good things about being in the community is that you're seeing people from all the different stages and of the journey, and also learning from each other. So we know some of the things to avoid or some of the things to do. Yeah.
Thanks, Moonlake.
Yeah.
I think that was really very insightful. So now I think we should move on to another aspect of
Yes.
managing ADHD. And I'm seeing actually some questions, especially around managing our children with ADHD. So one of the questions I'm going to read out is, what are strategies for breaking cycles of mutual dysregulation, especially when both parent and child have difficulty with emotional control? Any of you want to take?
She's managing her child.
Yeah, any one of you want to take this?
Hannah, you want to go first?
So actually, this question is, what are strategies for breaking cycles of mutual dysregulation, especially when both child and parent have difficulty with emotional control? Yeah, this is a pretty good question. I mean, I think as what Moonlake has shared in her slides, usually for a child with ADHD, there is quite a lot of emotional cycles. And one of the challenges that a child with ADHD may face is actually being able to stop, think, and do. So actually, and for a parent also, I mean, speaking personally as a parent, and also, I think if you have a child with ADHD, maybe you might have some ADHD symptoms. I think sometimes the bit on just being able to stop is quite hard. Yeah, and then if you don't stop, and then it just starts spiraling into a big kind of a big, like it just grows and grows and then it becomes an explosion. So that's something actually it's quite important for a parent to be wary, and actually just the first thing to do actually is to maybe stop, and actually if you want to talk to your child, it's actually important to do it in a calm setting. So Mulek was actually mentioning about mindfulness. One thing that as a professional, I've kind of like went through some courses, and even we do advocate to parents is to do mindful parenting. So it's also going to be another webinar on mindful parenting for another 2 hours or 3 hours, but there are resources online. And I think one thing really helpful about mindful parenting is just being able to stop and being able to be present with your child, than to be too overwhelmed by what's happening or what's causing the whole emotional issues and all the dysregulation. So I think one of the most important thing for your child and yourself is to really just stop, and both of you must be calm enough. If not, find ways to actually calm yourself down first before addressing the issue, instead of going to a whole big cycle and then it becomes very out of control and everyone gets very dysregulated and the relationship gets affected. Yeah, so these are just some kind of advice on my part lah. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, first of all, I think it's great that the parent is aware of the dysregulation on their part too, because not everyone is aware or is willing to admit it. So that is really a big first step already, honestly. And I want to affirm you for that. And I think realizing that, right? And we do know that between, let's say, two parties, being a parent and a child, one is the adult, one isn't, right? So even though, we may not always like it, I think we have to be the one that would take the initiative or the first step to manage ourselves. I think for myself, even now, right? We always know how difficult it is to change someone else. It's not that easy to change ourselves too, but easier, with a little bit more control. So I think for this kind of situation, is to actually, it's like the oxygen mask analogy, put the mask on ourselves before the child. So it's really to manage ourselves. If we can't do it on our own, right? And there are strategies that Hannah was mentioning earlier on, it's really to get support, whether it's peer support or actually like counselor or some other professional support. Because I think particularly as caregivers and women, we always tend to be the last one to take care of ourselves. We're always so busy taking care of everyone else that there's nothing left when it comes to us. And yet I've always been reminded that if I don't take care of myself, not just my own family, but even the work that I do right now, right? It can just crumble. And so we need to be always mindful of that. But the other thing I learned recently at a alternative education forum that I went to, we always talk about self-care, right? But sometimes we over talk about it until it seems like it's our responsibility, and if we're not doing it, feel guilty, right? But sometimes we're not able to. We're not in that position. We're just so overwhelmed, right? So one of the speakers said we have to think about the concept of we care, community. We care, community, right? So really, it's if you have girlfriends, other mommy friends, church friends, cell groups, whatever, right? Get that community of support. If you need that extra bit, right, that you may not have. But it's to realize that, recognize what triggers you, recognize the physical or the emotional or whatever, the physiological signs. And then, as Hannah said, right, take a deep breath and either get yourself out of there, go to the bathroom, wash your face. That at least, gives a bit of a heartbreak between the adrenaline and then the amygdala going crazy and the actual behavior or the words coming out. Because when words come out, it's very hard to retract them. And sometimes words hurt a lot more than the physical as well. So one of the things also I always remember is connect before correct. Okay, relationship before rules, right? So it's always to try to, even though you don't feel like it, remember the big picture. Each time there's a dysregulation, especially on our part, we're actually doing a withdrawal from the bank account of goodwill in the relationship with the child, right? So, and it's such an important thing because we know that for ADHD, because of the slower, executive function, maturity, and all that, the need for support or scaffolding may be longer. And so, if we don't have a good relationship with our child, or at least manage ourselves as well, it's going to be much harder to give that support. So that's one of the reasons why some of the parents in our community, if they suspect that they may also be having the condition, it's just that they weren't aware when they're younger, it might be good to actually go and address that part first, because that it helps one to manage better with the child. In fact, sometimes my kid and I, it's like, I get you, and she gets me. And there's a certain kind of like teammate camaraderie there, so that actually sometimes helps to get some of the cooperation.
Nice. And actually on that, I think everyone here is really appreciating all the very practical tips, you're sharing, Moonlake. One of the questions here is, how can parents who with possible ADHD build consistent routines and discipline when they themselves struggle with consistency? Maybe you can share from your experience.
Okay, you asking me?
Yes.
Yes, I was absolutely inconsistent. I would always reward charts or even punishment, the consequences, and I forget to follow up on it. Okay, and that was terrible. And so honestly, as I said earlier, I had to take care of myself first. I had to put in those habits or those caring for myself, or in my case, also go and get a diagnosis. Right? Read up about executive functioning. I have a coach as well that I see. Right? I have a therapist that I see. I basically have to walk the talk, eat my own cooking, so to say. For all the strategies that's supposed to work to manage ADHD, I have to do it myself. So, but also give space to myself to forgive myself, because I'm going to mess up from time to time, right? And then pick myself and try again. So, I mean, may not be the best answer, but that's the real answer.
Yeah, but I do agree with you, Malik. I think a lot of times we need to be kind to ourselves. Yeah, I think that's very important. And I think, like, you mentioned about we care. It's a nice way to put self-care. I think that's the most important thing, actually, before you take care of your child. Because when that isn't in place, actually it just makes things a bit more harder and more difficult. So I think we just have to be kind to ourselves, and in the season, whatever we can do, we try our best. So a lot of routine things, a lot of times professionals will say, oh, we should do this rule chart, we should do this timetable thing. If it's really not something for the parent, and it adds more stress, I would say just take a step back, reflect what is doable with the other parent, and then we try to do whatever we can with our child. Yeah, so that is what will be more of a crucial point to focus on.
Cool. No, next question here. There's one around how do I support and manage my own daughter who is diagnosed by the psychologist, but the school doesn't recognize it. And this person says we need school to help as medication by private psychiatrists expensive. Now, before I ask Moonlake and Hannah to just chime in, I think there are some limitations. We can't speak on behalf of the school, but I think it also raises a point here about how maybe the schools can and should be involved, and also love to hear perspectives from Hannah and Moonlake because you're on the ground around this. Over to you. Maybe Moonlake, you can
Hannah
start
First.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't mind starting, and then Moonlake can add on. Actually, for my time when I was working with the schools, most schools in Singapore are generally quite supportive. In terms of like, as what Moonlake has mentioned, there is the special needs education officer in both primary and secondary school. There's also the school counselor. Usually these are the first people that parents can approach to kind of like see how their child can be further supported. Yeah. Maybe I'm not sure about this person when they brought up the psychologist, the school doesn't recognize it. I'm not sure, maybe sometimes it's from a private setting. Some schools may be a bit more careful, basically. But actually, I think all in all, the school is generally supportive. So, we could actually just talk to the school teacher first. Go the first step to the form teacher and say, like, my child has this difficulty. Usually you can do it at parent-teacher meetings, or even maybe just email the teacher, or any time that is convenient, and then just say that you have some things that you want to kind of help your child, and then the school will naturally kind of find the right kind of resources and even the right kind of person to kind of help you out with it. I think also on top of medication, they will also look at how to give accommodations and environmental support to your child. So I think it's kind of good to work together with the school to see how they can best support your child in the school setting to thrive, like, with whatever difficulties they have. Yeah. Moonlake, you can add on.
I would like to actually find out more, why doesn't the school recognize the psychologist's diagnosis, and what exactly the parents expecting? Because if it's a psychologist's diagnosis, I would assume that they probably did the assessments, and there's something quite concrete to show, like about the learning gaps, or that there's ADHD or there's other learning issues, and that should be usually sufficient for school to, let's say, provide accommodation. Medication is quite a separate thing, and medication is not by a psychologist but by a psychiatrist. So it's two different types of mental health professional. So not everyone that has an ADHD diagnosis would have medication. It depends on whether they saw the psychiatrist. If medication by the private psychiatrist is expensive, then perhaps consider doing either the subsidized route, because you already have a psychologist diagnosis. That might help to fast track a bit. Or as I did, go to see a restructured hospital psychiatrist as a private patient. So that's still another way to access a little bit lower cost in terms of consultation fees. There may or may not be subsidies for private patients, but the subsidy actually is quite significant for those for medication for the polyclinic route. So that is really something that still should be maybe considered. Yeah.
Okay, and actually a related question to that that's popped up is, wondering if you have a panel of recommended doctors we can consult for kids.
Yeah, I was going to answer that over text, but okay, I can take it live. I mean, usually there is a lot of kind of options in Singapore. There's it's a range from subsidized all the way to private options. So in terms of subsidized options, usually you can just go to the polyclinic, get a kind of like see a polyclinic doctor and then get a referral to see a psychiatrist. It could be in one of the hospitals, like NUH has a service, KKH as well, even IMH for above 7 years old. So basically that's the subsidized option. I don't really have a panel of private kind of I mean, I think generally all doctors in Singapore, they're all recognized. Yeah, they're all under the Singapore Medical Association. So if they are from a private side and they call themselves a private psychiatrist, they're generally already kind of licensed to be. So according to convenience, according to whatever is helpful for the parent, I think those are some options we can go to. But usually I just want to say that usually for a diagnosis of ADHD, it's better to go with a psychiatrist, because there is a certain kind of like process that a psychiatrist will use. So usually a psychiatrist will use a diagnostic statistical manual to diagnose ADHD, and then they have a list of things they will check off over different settings, and even the onset, they will inquire all these things. For psychologists, sometimes it really varies on their training. Yeah, so that's my feedback on a panel in terms of recommendations. Yeah.
Yeah, I basically I mean, we do know different people, but it's very hard to pinpoint like that one person. It really is up to the situation. Like I agree with Hannah. I think as a child psychiatrist would be one person to see. And especially if we're talking about private, many of them have websites. They put down their training there. So check out the profile, right? To see whether they actually have done work in this space. Because if they haven't, then maybe they're not as familiar with ADHD. The other way is to actually speak to, again, the community, right? Friends or whatever, and that's how sometimes word of mouth. Besides a child psychiatrist, actually sometimes do consider seeing a pediatrician that has a special interest or background in developmental behavioral pediatrics, because they actually see the whole spectrum of what I would call special education needs or special needs kids. And it's also can be a very different perspective, and they can also prescribe medication. So it really depends on the age of the child. Sometimes a more complex condition, and a younger age might be better off with a pediatrician with the developmental behavioral background. But certainly we know a lot of also very good experienced child and adolescent psychiatrists around. So yeah, that'll probably be the first stop.
Great. Now, there are two questions around this, right? One is ADHD something that you inherit? Is it genetic? Can my children outgrow it? Is it primarily, due to nature or nurture?
Okay, there's always the very common question, and actually I would say is primarily nature, genetic. There is data research to show on that. So the chances are that if you see a child that has ADHD, you have to look up the tree, and see potentially which one of the two parents or even both parents might have it. And there's also, I think, data that says about 30% chance a sibling might have it. So in my own family, right, I have it. My daughter has it. I look at my upwards, like my mom or dad, I can see one or both of them, siblings, cousins, aunties, I see it all. Okay. And it's an interesting thing because sometimes when it runs in families, it becomes so normalized in the family, they don't think there's anything unusual. And so that's why sometimes they also don't seek help, right? Because they figure maybe most families are like us. So however, going back to more serious stuff, where does the nurture come in? Okay. And I want to draw the analogy again to, let's say, a diabetes. We know that diabetes actually is genetic. It runs in families. But we also know that some people will have it earlier or have it worse than others. Why is that so? And that's where the environment or the nurture part comes in, right? For example, we know from data as well, things like device use can exacerbate a lot of things and even make people who don't have ADHD behave like they have ADHD, right? It's just like too much going on all the time, right? So just like diabetes, right? You might have a predisposition genetically, but you could potentially delay onset or even minimize risk if you watch what you eat, right? Keep exercising, keep fit, keep active, that kind of stuff. So same thing, right? For ADHD, if there is a genetic link, but you're exposing yourself to environments and things that just make it more likely to get worse, then that's why it's just quite unmanageable in certain situations. So I would say do consider the part that genetic plays, because if you think about it, and that's why Unlocking ADHD is a charity, because if there's a genetic link, that means that if we don't address it on a larger scale, public health scale, this thing keeps on going on, right? And if there are not systems of support to help people thrive, it's going to be a really bad cycle that can go downwards. So that's why it's important to understand the genetic part that it plays too.
Yeah, maybe I just want to add on something to what Moonlake has to say, and also on this topic. I think the other thing as well is I as a therapist believe a lot in neuroplasticity. Yeah, so ADHD is genetic. Yeah, so what happens is that if we start intervention early or we put in place certain things, which is addressing the nurture part, then actually you get the ADHD more controlled. And to me, ADHD is like a spectrum. Maybe instead of it being severe, if you didn't do anything, actually I have done something and it's actually more manageable. Yeah, and then it's easier for everyone to manage. We also know that ADHD has comorbid kind of like mental health conditions, which is also another new topic. And I think more commonly in girls, if we don't address it earlier, it spirals into other issues like depression, anxiety, OCD, even eating disorders. So this is the part where nurture would really play a huge part in kind of like preventing such things from happening. Yeah, so those are just some things that I think is good for us to note, and how we can manage the ADHD condition and how nurture can has a big part to play in this area. Yeah.
Cool. So actually, I think we only about 5 minutes left, and maybe what I like to do is to pose a last question to Hannah, because it's a question around what's the difference between an educational therapist versus an occupational therapist, and more importantly, how do they support kids with ADHD differently?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Whoever, like Fiona, thanks for your question. I think I've already explained what an occupational therapist does. For an educational therapist, usually their training, it could be the background is more psychology based. Some of them have like a bachelor's in psychology and then they branched out to become an educational psychologist. Some of them might be just kind of like, they are more keen on, looking at how can we use educational kind of strategies to support a child with ADHD. So for an occupational therapist, we don't just focus on, educational. We don't look at like sometimes the educational psychologists would do like a IQ testing, a kind of like a psychologically related kind of testing. We don't do that. We look at other aspects, like a lot of children with ADHD have motor skills problems. Some of them have some other things like sensory processing issues, and that's where the occupational therapists will look into, and then from there we actually support the parents and the child in our individual kind of treatment sessions if you do see an occupational therapist. So that is like a summary of how we are different. Yeah, so the strategies and the techniques and even the intervention approach is quite different between an educational therapist and an occupational therapist. Yeah, thanks Dash for the questions.
No problem. And you know what? I think we have pretty much answered most of the questions that have been posed on the Q&A box. So, I think from a time perspective, I just wanted to maybe ask Moonlake and yourself, do y'all have any last, parting words or any perspectives to share on this topic? I think we've all had a great time hearing a lot of insights from both your experiences, your knowledge, your expertise. Maybe Moonlake, maybe Hannah, you want to start first, and then we'll let Moonlake close off.
Yeah, to me, I think ADHD is always a condition that I'm constantly learning about. Yeah, as much as I'm helping the children as well as the families. And I always see it as it's a strength. There's a lot of strengths in ADHD. There are a lot of like famous superstars. There's a lot of people with ADHD and they thrive. Like Moonlake's also another example who thrives. Yeah, and I feel like when you look at a disability, there is so many things that we can actually do, and we shouldn't be like so affected that we are lousy or we are terrible and things like that. There's always a path out, and most importantly, I always like to look at the strength of a person. So if anything, I just want to say that there's always strength in somebody. It's just that what is the thing that we should look at, and how can we actually harness that strength to really help the person thrive in Singapore, the society. The other thing as well is I think there's still a lot of awareness that can be done for ADHD in Singapore, especially in school settings. I feel like maybe our environment can change. So that's also something that I hope to see Singapore grow in. And if any of us are able to change things, I think it's good to just go for it to make a difference. Thanks.
So well said. For me, I think I want to echo what Hannah said about strengths, because that's so much of part of my core values, my core beliefs. And there is a free strength test that is actually being used by University of Oxford in working with the parent support groups for children with autism. I went for the workshop recently. It's called the VIA character strength. And maybe one of my team members can look it up and send the link in the chat, right? VIA character strength. You can do that and it's free. I think there's like 25 different strengths of character. Because again, when we talked earlier about ADHD, many kids hear so many negative things about themselves. Everyone is scolding them. And they form that self-identity. So we want to speak into them positive words and strengths so that they know that they are value. So really, I want to echo what Hannah said about strengths. Reframe it, right? See what is it about your kid that you love. They surely have some strengths and something so lovable about them, and hold that in mind. As an aside, I guess you have to remind yourself, for those of us who are married, right? What do we love about our spouse, right? When we're angry with them, and try and remember that. The other thing is really to remember that at the end of the day, what's the most important is the relationship. So really focus on that, because there were times, not just my life, but in the lives of my friends who have kids, when it was too stressful, some kids actually went beyond the edge, right? And most parents would give anything not to have the kid in that situation. So let's keep things in perspective. What is the most important to us? It's our kids. So focus on the relationship, the rest will come. So focus on the strengths, identify strengths, and the relationship. Natasha, is it okay if I went and share the poll? Or the poll is being shared? Oh, great. Let me just share the poll now then, before we forget that part.
Yes, thanks, Moonlake. If you can share the poll, that would be great. So, we're almost at the end of today, and as always, feedback is good. That's going to help Moonlake. It's also going to help, the St. Margaret's Ex-Students Association team, which myself and Hannah are part of, bring you more interesting and relevant programming for members. So if you can just take a few minutes to just complete the poll, we would be so grateful. And as you complete the poll and give us your feedback, I was looking through the question and answers just now, and I think there was a comment made by one of the dads here, and talking about male caregivers. And I do want to say that yes, definitely you guys are just as important. I think in fact when we look at caregiving, there shouldn't be a gender bias. I know primarily they're more women, but I do recognize that dads, the men in our families, the grandfathers, you guys all play a very important role. So if you are one of those here, really, I could applaud now, but it'd be a bit weird, right? But yes, it's a virtual applause that I'm giving you, and I think all of us here too. We do appreciate you, and we also want to continue to have you included in these conversations as well. And I think while there's always that saying, right? Behind every successful man is a successful. I mean, it's a woman helping. I also want to say that the reason why Hannah, myself, and Moonlake can be here talking to you guys is because our husbands are supporting us in the background, and we are all grateful to them as well. So we definitely recognize that. Okay, looking at the poll, I hope some of you, I'm just gonna give like a couple of seconds more to get feedback. Again, every feedback counts. If you think this was great and helpful and you think the poll is a bit too hard, you want to leave us some compliments, you can do that. You can do so in the chat. That will also be helpful.
Yeah, and like if you guys would like to learn more about unlocking ADHD, we do have a Facebook private support group, about 4,000 people right now. You just have to answer the membership questions to join. So the link is accessible on the website. We also have something called a Discord server for those of you who are gamers or older kids.
Oh,
That's
nice.
about 1,000 plus people there. So please join that. We do parent workshops, parent webinars. We just did one that's available on YouTube on how to strengthen the relationship between parents and teenage or youth ADHDers. So please check it out using the collaborative problem solving tool. And please do consider donating to support the work that we do.